This is every difference between old and new Minecraft. Before the Minecraft pigs were added officially, they originally had a different face texture, with the only change being that their eyes were flipped so that they weren't as derpy as they are now. And while I get that this makes more logical sense, it also just seems way too professional for the pigs. Like, this is how I would expect a Minecraft pig to look if he was selling me door-to-door solar panels. I'm a lot more of a fan of the ones that we got in the game. Although elytras are great for transportation, they're obviously not much when it comes to protection. But ever since 1.19.4, that's been a little bit more easy to bear with, since now you can swap the equipped gear that you have in your hotbar just by right-clicking them with your hand. So in an instant, you could switch from your traveling elytra into your battle chestplate and be a lot better equipped for any bad guys that come your way. And then, if you're not ready for the fight, switch right back to the elytra, go for your rockets, and get out of there. You definitely got a lot of options on how you can tackle this. Minecraft Vexes are annoying, but now they're a little less annoying, at least on the eyes. And that's because in 1.19.3, the Vexes had their models changed to look more like Allays, which not only means that we don't have to look at this eyesore anymore, but it also makes more logical sense. And now it seems like the pillagers are trapping these Allays so that the evokers can turn them into deadly Vexes, which is a lot more impressive of a spell than just turning a blue sheep red. I guess they gotta work from their magic somewhere. And sheep's wool is the only color that's changing, since now potion colors have changed to be a lot more distinct since 1.19.4. And now you'll see that these match up better to the particle effects that you get when you drink them, which can be a big help for once you recognize which one of these is which, but it's also hard to call this any kind of colorblind support. And so while this change is great, if we were to get something more akin to this kind of texture resource pack that we've shown off in the past, I think that'd be an even better step going forward. Alright, pop quiz, let's play a game. I'll play you a sound effect and you guess which block it is. Now, alright, if you guess stone, I can't blame you, because it really is, but that's actually the sound that bone blocks used to make before they eventually got their own sound effect in 1.16. I guess with the changes to Soul Sand Valleys, they decided they needed to make these a little bit more unique. And frankly, I'm glad they did. It's no secret that lava's the water of the nether. Or I guess with glitches, water's the water of the nether, but at least the intended way, lava flows about the same speed that water does in the overworld. But it's only recently that lava's been changed to push entities when it's flowing, and that's allowed for much better nether farms that we can see here. In the past, a blaze farm would have to look like this mess with a bunch of pressure plates and pistons. Now you just add in some lava, it's a lot cleaner, and it makes more visual sense too. Minecraft 1.14 wasn't just the texture update, but it was also apparently the abbreviation update, since what used to be called rose red, dandelion yellow, and cactus green dye were just changed to red, yellow, and green dye for consistency with the other dye colors. Which I guess makes sense. If you have multiple different ways to get the other dyes, you can't exactly name it after one thing. Not to mention they're not even called roses anymore, they're called poppies, so I can see why the change was made. Prior to 1.15, it was possible to break iron doors without a pickaxe. It was just gonna take a while. But now if you were to do this, you're just gonna have wasted your time and not even get an iron door. And both of those seem like a slap in the face. Minecraft jukeboxes have always been a redstone item, but they've never always played well with redstone. And up until recently, it was completely impossible to use things like dispensers to put music discs in and hoppers to take music disc out. But as of 1.19.4, finally this implementation's added to our jukeboxes, letting us loop the music over and over again, or until you get copyright striked. Yeah, sorry about that one. This is a Minecraft feature that used to exist, got broken for many years, and then now has been fixed again. Since in the early days of Minecraft, it was made so that when you took damage, your camera would tilt in the direction that the damage came from. But strangely enough, this was broken when LAN was added into the game. Shivoxa goes into way better detail about this line of code than I ever could. What's interesting is that in recent updates, it's actually been fixed again. And honestly, after over 8 years of being broken, it practically feels like a new feature. I'm sure to a lot of players it felt like it. Getting flint and feathers for arrows already feels expensive to craft, but it could have been so much worse. Since in the past in Alpha 1.0, you would actually use iron ingots to craft arrows instead of flint, which makes more sense for why these arrow textures have a white tip, but until you get a good iron farm, that would have been just way too costly. Good thing for Fletchers, I guess. And our arrows haven't just gotten cheaper, they've also gotten slower. Since back in Beta 1.8, it was possible that if you held down the right click with a bow in your hand, you could actually spam fire out arrows like this, which I'm not gonna lie, that is pretty satisfying, but I can definitely see why this changed. And it's funny to think that crossbows were the one that got the quick charge enchantment when it seems like our bows were quick charging just fine on their own before the enchantment was added. Prior to 1.9, it was possible to kill the Ender Dragon using only snowballs. It was just gonna take a while. And in fairness, you could still kill the Ender Dragon using snowballs, you would just also need to place down end crystals to damage it with the explosions. And given that those same end crystals are gonna heal the dragon, you'd really have to be precise about how you do this. I think if you want to give this a shot at killing it with snowballs, just go back to 1.8. Horses have gone through a lot of different looks in Minecraft. There was the original horse textures that we got back in Minecraft's April Fool's joke for the 2.0 update, but that was just retextured cows and pigs. And then in 1.6 we got actual horses, but then their model was changed again back in 1.13. And as they are now, I think they look a lot more fitting in Minecraft. With the World of Color update in 1.12, a lot of our dyed items changed color, and they weren't the only ones to do it, since the shulker boxes also got a whole new set of colors. And personally, I kinda like how some of the original colors look for the shulker boxes, but it's hard to say that the new ones aren't more true to the actual dye colors, so I get why the change was made. Prior to 1.11, as you wore down the durability on one of your tools, not only would its health bar decrease, but the colors of that health bar would get less and less vibrant as it went along, which honestly, I think you gotta pick one or the other, and Mojang seemed to agree, since now the durability colors stay vibrant all the way through, from a fresh diamond pickaxe to a broken tragedy. When a player gets hit in Minecraft, they turn red. That's something that's been consistent all the way through. But prior to 1.8, if you wore armor as well, then that armor would also take that red shader on top of it. But nowadays, it doesn't nearly hurt as bad, and we're the only ones who have to suffer from a punch. Before 1.9, it was possible to get Bedrock to drop itself as an item. You just have to be very precise about how you broke it. So now if your friend claims that they got Bedrock legitimately, yeah, you can raise some suspicion. It's literally not even a loot table for the block anymore, so sorry to burst their bubble. Totems of Undying are an invaluable item to have, but apparently, a good thing can get even better, since as of 1.16.2, these idols now give off 40 seconds of fire resistance as well. So if you have to use one, then at least it pulls out all the stops for you. Gilded Blackstone stands as one of the rarest blocks to find in Minecraft, but if you're really looking for this block for your builds, then the recent versions might have you covered. In current generations of Bastion remnants, you're even more likely to find the block hiding underneath Bastion chests. So look out for those if you want to strike gold. 10 years ago, stairs used to be so much more annoying, since if you even went up them a little, it would force you to walk all the way up the stair. And it seems like Mojang noticed how annoying this was, because that was quickly changed. Though not until the update 1.5. So if you're playing in versions before that, I'm deeply sorry. Back in 2012, we didn't have horses or elytras, so that meant that running was the best way to get around. But even then, it wasn't a perfect system, because back then we had to double tap the walk key to actually sprint, and we wouldn't get a dedicated sprint button until that was added in the game in 1.7.2. Sometimes, the different item names can be easy to lose track of, and it seems that even Mojang knows this. That's why, as of the Nether update, the clay block and the clay item that you get from breaking it now have a distinction. Since then, these have been called clay balls, which is probably what you called them anyway, so the change makes sense. I'm gonna go out on a limb and guess that the clock isn't one of your most used items. I mean, it's costly, it only works in one dimension, and it just gets annoying to take the time to check. It even seems like Mojang didn't want to look at this item, given how its texture was unchanged even in the so-called texture update of 1.14. But now its shading and colors have been brought up to speed, and I gotta say, it's looking a lot nicer to boot. The crafting recipe book is a great resource to have, but while it's useful here, it hasn't always been the best implemented, and you'd see as much if you had a potion effect since it was usually hidden behind. But now we see these effects along the right side of the screen, and we can even hover over them to see the time remaining. Minecraft's credits are historically a weird sight to see. Going on for a total of 27 minutes and 15 seconds, it's hard to even sit through the thing. I can't even say I've tried to read more than the first line. I always just skip it and move on. But if you want to give it a go, the new update makes it a bit easier. Now, by holding down the space bar, you can speed up the playback of the end poem. Steve and Alex have pretty basic animations, to say the least. But that's not to discount the subtle ones that Mojang has added in. As you'll see, there are now several hand animations for things like placing a boat, feeding pandas, and even breeding animals, which I think is worth noticing just to give props for the subtle changes, because otherwise they'd go underappreciated. Privacy is a hot topic these days, and for some players it's the most important thing, so to abide by that, Mojang's got you covered. See this option labeled Allow Server Listings? Well, toggle that, and now you won't show up when someone checks the server, and that'll let you enjoy the game all without being swarmed by your adoring fans. Sure, the anvil is a great item, but it's definitely got its share of limitations, and while most of us are familiar with the too expensive limit on level costs, there also exists a character limit for item names, though the problem started to be that some items that were added in already had too long of a name, such as the new waxed, lightly weathered cut copper stairs at 41 characters. So to avoid that hassle, the limit has now been changed from 35 characters right up to 50. To the right person, texture inconsistencies can be very frustrating, because after you notice it, it's going to be tough to unsee. And while the jungle door originally fell in this category, we can rest easy with the new 1.17 update. Here, the item sprite and the door texture finally line up again, meaning we'll just have to find some other texture to complain about. Do you remember when desert pyramids used to look like this? Well, sure enough, when they were added in, these desert pyramids would generate with wool for the colorful bits, bits instead of the orange and blue terracotta that we're used to. And the reason being is that block wasn't in the game. It would take until 1.8 that we finally got it switched to hardened clay, and then that was later renamed to the terracotta we're used to. Nowadays, the creepers are much stronger than they used to be, since back in the early days, a creeper's explosion would always be 43 points of damage at the strongest. But after some time, Mojang would change that to be 64 points of damage that we know today, which yes, does make the creeper stronger than the warden, which is crazy to think about. The Eyes of Ender used to be a big waste of time, since they wouldn't always lead you to the closest stronghold, and what that would mean is that sometimes it might be pointing you to one that you're nowhere near to, even if you're standing right above the closest one. And why did this bug happen? I'm not exactly sure, but it did get fixed in 1.6.1, so thankfully we don't have to worry about it anymore. Clearly, Minecraft is a great game, which is why it's always nice to see more accessibility options added in. So for one example, if you don't want to be left out of the text conversation, then 1.12 has you covered. Simply hit Control-B, and now chat will be narrated for easy listening. Simple as that. When you look through the changes in an update, a lot of it reads as cleanup, which makes sense since it'd be tough to do everything in one go. So even though we got our big texture update back in 1.14, it's still taken until now for the Wither's skull texture to reflect those changes. But hey, from now on, it's fixed. The replace item command can be a lot of fun to play around with, whether that's giving yourself an Enrod unicorn horn or putting a command block on a zombie's head. There are a lot of silly applications here. Though as fun as it is, the replace item command no longer exists in 1.17. And while that's technically true, it's just been replaced with the other command, /item replace. And honestly, I'm not sure why it changed, but it's worth a heads up. Along with the changes to the Nether, Soul Sand also got a much cooler, more laid-back cousin. Because whether you're using it for a basalt generator or soul campfires, soul soil just generally seems like less of a burden. But the question is, can it spawn withers? And as you can see, it works just the same, making this an even better replacement for the sand of the past. If you played Minecraft back in the day, then you know that these boats would break all the time. But part of that was by design, since in 2012, you could only exit a boat or minecart if you broke the vehicle. And without the ability to left shift to dismount, that means that we could cause certain situations where you softlock yourself in that boat, completely unable to get out, which is definitely the saddest way to lose your hardcore world. That's just brutal. Brightness plays a critical role in the game's atmosphere, which is why it's always struck me as weird that the developer set the slider by default to the lowest setting of moody. It's like when you subscribe to a channel for notifications on all uploads, but then YouTube still asks you to ring the bell to actually do that. It makes no sense. Oh, and thanks for subscribing, by the way. But now it seems that Mojang's changed their ways, as now when you start up Minecraft, the brightness will now default to 50 instead. Look, I don't blame you if you don't walk backwards a lot. All in all, it's substantially slower and just about as awkward as it is in real life. But if you hop in a third-person point of view, you'll notice that this motion now has a new animation since its past. Now, instead of walking backwards in a rotated fashion, you'll just walk straight backwards. With all the new nether blocks that were added in, we got ourselves something of a counterpart to cobblestone. With blackstone, we can craft ourselves furnaces, as well as our stone tools. But strangely, one nether-centric item was missing. Well, 1.16.2 rectified that, now letting us to make a brewing stand using the darker stone. As we know it today, TNT has a 100% drop rate, which makes it indispensable for mining your resources with a tunnel bore like so. But that only got updated in 1.14, and back in 2012, you would have to mine out everything by hand, or risk losing a good amount of your resources if you used a TNT block like so. With this one bucket, we can decimate this ocean. Let me show you how. See, back in 2012, water needed a solid block below it to generate an infinite water source, meaning if we just grab a water bucket like so, this whole ocean will be completely washed out. And you can understand why they'd fix that in 1.5. If you're the sort that likes to hunt for your food, then fire aspect is a must. Trust me, it's a lot less hassle than running around with a flint and steel. But while we've previously just used these for the pigs, cows, and sheep that we keep at the farm, this enchant got a lot more useful for monsters. Now, if you kill a husk zombie or zombie villager with this and it happens to drop a potato, it'll be baked instead, giving you a much better food source if you happen to get it. Let's be honest, dispensers are an annoying block to craft. Since there's no good way to quick craft items with a non-stackable in the recipe, it takes a long time to make a lot. But would you believe it, these used to be even worse to craft. Pre 1.13, we needed full health bows to craft them, and it's a pain that I'm glad we no longer have. If you take the time, NBT data could be a lot of fun to mess around with. And fortunately, 1.17 added even more fuel to that fire, if you want to call it that. Now, it's possible to give entities the tag has visual fire, which does right as it says on the tin. With this, you can make an entity look like it's on fire, but it won't take damage or burn the same as a real flame. And while I'm not sure it's practical, it is weird enough to try. Villagers aren't the nicest of mobs, clearly. But now they seem to have regained some of their humanity. See, before, they would attack any villager, no holds barred. But here on out, they'll leave the babies be. So if you break their crossbows using this trick, then we can fully pacify them and reintegrate them into society. Grass path blocks can add a nice bit of detail to any roads that you plan on making, but since its addition, it's been quite annoying to work with. Since you can only make this path block with grass, if you broke the block and then placed it back with dirt, you need to wait for the grass to spread before you even fix it. Well, that's no longer an issue, since you can now make this with dirt, coarse dirt, podzol, and mycelium. Thankfully so. Sometimes, Mojang seems a bit indecisive on a certain change. Take netherite leggings for example. Originally added in Snapshot 20W6A, their texture just changed 4 weeks later, only to change again in the post-release in 1.16.4. And I imagine there are other more important things to worry about than a pair of pants. Eating a pufferfish isn't a great idea. Not only is the poison going to leave you with a damaged life bar, but the nausea isn't that fun either. But that latter effect has actually gotten some changes. Instead of giving off nausea 2, pufferfish only give off nausea 1 when consumed in 1.16.2. That doesn't make any difference, so it's just a pointless change. Now, although the wither skeleton's been in the game since 1.4, they didn't get their own spawn egg until 1.11, which is just weird to think about since how else were you gonna get one of these things? I mean, the summon command didn't exist back then, so you're kind of out of options. Back in 1.3, we could fit up to 60 cows in this hole, but now, thanks to entity cramming, that maxes out at 24, which is a shame when you're trying to make an efficient farm, but it's definitely a lot more humane. This is what lava looks like nowadays, and this is what it looks like in 2012. It's pretty shocking, I know. And while there were a few textures that got changed in the updates following, it was in the 1.14 texture update that most of our textures got a huge rework when they were done by Jappa, which makes some comparisons definitely hard to look at, and thankfully Netherrack looks like this instead of this mess. Probably one of the biggest changes in this update is also quite likely to go underappreciated, because for so long, Minecraft has run off the Java 8 release from back in 2014, and to put that in perspective, we're now on Java 16 for the standard version. So thankfully, 1.17 allows us to run the game in the new version, which will not only help for performance, but also help the modding community use some more modern features. Minecraft's clouds don't get a lot of love, and by this point, many of us have turned them off in the settings. But part of that is because these exist so low within the world, and thankfully, along with the new height to our worlds, these now can float at a Y level of 192 instead of 128 like before. Proper capitalization clearly means a lot to me. I mean, it's the reason why I'm skip the tutorial and not skip the tutorial. So fortunately, 1.16 proved Mojang is also on that same page. Now, when you're editing a sign, it says edit sign message with consistent capitalization, which I've got to say looks quite a bit nicer. Enderman and water don't mix. Then it makes sense that since 1.11, they'll take 1 hit point of damage when they're hit by a splash bottle of water. Drowned are famous for prowling around the various rivers that we've got on the surface, but you're less likely to see some of these in the caves below. At least, you wouldn't until now. But with the addition of aquifers next to dripstone caves, these mobs can now spawn in the underground, giving their zombie cousins a bit of competition. A handful of Minecraft textures tend to go unnoticed, but some of that is intentional. For instance, how would you ever notice that the Nether update gave redstone a bottom texture if 99% of the time you can't even place this item unsupported? So if you didn't notice this, I don't blame you. I didn't either, but now we both know where to find it. Suspicious Stew can be quite the toss-up, unless you know how to play your cards right. If you're smart with your flowers, then you can essentially make these into discount potions for regen, saturation, and more. But up until now, you couldn't use them on a full stomach. Though, in current versions of the game, we're able to slurp these down without a hassle, even if the hunger bar is full, letting you get some night vision even if you're stuffed. Leading mobs around can be something of a grueling task, and unless you've got a lot of slime and string, it's not easy to do in bulk. So thankfully, little changes like this can lighten the load, since now your horses, mules, and donkeys will follow you around when you're holding a golden carrot or a golden apple. And side note, you should definitely pick the cheaper one. Dark mode is all the rage these days. From your Discord to your desktop, it's the main way that we operate. And while there are texture packs that add in things like a dark mode inventory and UI, Mojang also threw their hat in the ring with this update. Now it's possible to go into the accessibility settings and enable a dark mode monochromatic start screen, which is gonna make playing late at night a lot easier on the eyes. When you're killing a bunch of mobs for XP, it's easy to lose focus, which is a shame because when you take the time to actually get a breather, then you might just notice that these experience orbs have recently changed their look. As of recent versions, these bubbles are now transparent, which doesn't make too much of a difference since we still pick them up the same way, but hey, now you know. When you're building, sometimes it can be frustrating when blocks don't behave how you'd expect, which is why it's nice that recent versions have glass panes and iron bars lining up properly with the walls. Before, if you looked at something like this, it's just not what you would want for the structure. So a subtle change, but a treat to the eyes nonetheless. It's a well-established rule. You can't sleep when monsters are nearby. But while that's not changing anytime soon, Mojang has added one small bit to lighten the load. You see, even though you can advance to morning when a zombie is next door, you're still able to set your spawn point the same. game, which is nice because if I'm stuck here, I'd at least want a safety net to keep on hand. Lapis lazuli is kind of the odd one out when it comes to Minecraft minerals. I mean, it's arguably the least useful since it's just for enchanting and dyeing, and it's by no means the most rare or hard to find. It's just kinda there. But Mojang seems to have fixed one bit of separation in the recent update. And now, instead of crafting 9 lapis into a lapis lazuli block, it's called a block of lapis lazuli to match the other minerals. Every now and then, Mojang adds in a feature without properly implementing it, and these neglected bits can usually lie dormant in the game's code. But at least for the Deep Warm Ocean, that's finally changed. So now this biome will generate through natural means. So if you're sick of the coral and pickles, I guess here you go. To Mojang's credit, the 1.17 update seems to clean up a chunk of texture inconsistencies. And I'm sure you can thank the Vanilla Tweaks team for bringing some of those to the forefront. And among them, one that I'm sure that builders will be happy to see is that signs now match the planks texture from 1.14. Before now, they still had the old plank texture, even though they were added in the same update as the so-called texture update. But hey, better late than never. There are plenty of hidden gems to see just by messing around with Minecraft's NBT data. But with the Caves and Cliffs update, there's even a new fun sight to see. Now, slimes can be summoned with a maximum size of 128, allowing for some disturbingly huge mobs to roam your world. And all I can say is this: thank God they don't spawn in survival. With the changes in the Caves and Cliffs update, Minecraft's build height has needed to expand. And while that means that we can now place blocks much higher than we used to, one feature actually got even taller. Now, beacon beams are visible up to 1,343 blocks away from the source, as opposed to the 256 of the past. Shulker boxes are a crucial item to get your hands on, but while they're great for storage, they're not the best for item security. For an example, if you took all of your best valuables and enchanted tools into this one box, then if you dropped it into lava or something, all of it would get destroyed, even if it was netherite. But now we might have a chance to save some. In 1.17, a shulker box will pop when destroyed, allowing some of the items to escape the danger. Lava is not the best for visibility, but when you're in spectator mode, it's just frustrating to be blinded. Well, thankfully with 1.17's slew of changes, that restriction also got lifted. So, going forward, be prepared to properly spectate the Nether Fortress battle. Nothing's gonna hold you back. By this point, we're all familiar with the trick to turn your animals upside down by using a dinnerbone name tag. But in this update, that's been tweaked a bit. And now when you feed your flipped over friends, they'll look up at the food instead of down like they used to, though the sheep still don't work. If you've ever killed a bunch of mobs at an XP grinder, then you're well and aware that these orbs could cause a ton of lag. So thankfully, the Carpet Mod team had a feature that would allow experience orbs to combine into larger entities so that you didn't have as many on screen. And while that was a great solution, it was only third party. That is, until now, where in recent versions, the orbs will actually merge to cut down on entity count. And it's a nice touch for sure. Parrots are some of the most adorable mobs in Minecraft, but even though they seem sweet on the outside, these birds actually used to be quite a bit meaner. Prior to 1.16, it was possible that parrots would imitate hostile mobs on peaceful mode, so now they just keep their beaks shut and let us relax in peace, and thankfully so. Now, of the many things that Mojang could fix in the game, it's nice to see them work on the big things. Like, for example, how bamboo saplings were renamed to bamboo shoots, because trust me, the game was unplayable until that fix. But jokes aside, if they're gonna make the name more accurate, then why can't we compost these like real life too? It just seems unbalanced. Fire doesn't always make sense in Minecraft. If you want proof, just look to Fire Aspect. In Java, it's only for mobs, but on Bedrock Edition, you can even light TNT using just a Fire Aspect book. And while that's strange, luckily for us on PC, flame bows make a lot more sense, since here, they're now able to reignite campfires using flame arrows, earning a point for logic and another for style. What was the first biome added to Minecraft? Well, it certainly seems like the game started off with the Plains biome. Apparently, the first ever official type of biome was called Winter Mode, and it was added into Minecraft during the alpha phases, though you only had a small chance in spawning one of these, considering that it was a 25% of a world generating like this. But once Minecraft hit alpha version 1.2, that Winter Mode was eventually removed in favor of the proper biomes that were eventually added. Most of the time, we see vines as the inferior ladder. I mean, have you tried climbing a jungle tree using one of these? It's not always the easiest. But in recent times, vines have gotten a lot more interesting to use. As you can see, we can now climb these without supporting blocks, letting us ditch the mobs and bail right up to the treetops. By building a structure made out of gold blocks, cobblestone, and a nether reactor core, you could build yourself the so-called nether reactor, which was a feature that only exists in old versions of Bedrock Minecraft. And once you went through all those steps of building it, then what would happen is that you'd get this message telling you it was active, before it generated this massive structure of netherrack around it called the Nether Spire. And in a version of the game where you couldn't go into the nether dimension actually, this was a solid substitute. But as soon as there was an actual way to go into the nether dimension, mention, there wasn't really a point for this, and it's been lost to time. When you're playing on a multiplayer server, it can be a big headache when someone goes AFK, because if they aren't sleeping, you aren't sleeping. And now the phantoms are going to be a problem for everyone. So luckily, the community's prayers were answered in this one, allowing for the game rule, players sleeping percentage. With this, you can just set how many players you need to sleep till morning. And while it's 100% by default, I imagine most of us will bump that down significantly. If you were to fly 12,550,810 blocks away from spawn, then you'd be greeted to this site, the Farlands. And while this bug no longer exists in Minecraft, it is true that back in beta versions of the game, there existed this special terrain that would generate when the world started to overload. And is it weird? Sure. But it's also a piece of Minecraft history, so it's hard not to look at it and not get impressed. Man, make no mistake, even though this doesn't exist in Minecraft anymore, it's still plenty relevant. And that's why moments like Kilo Crazy Man walking all the way to the Farlands in survival is such a big deal. It takes months to do in this old versions, since when you don't have an elytra or a horse, it's tough to get there naturally. And I just have to accept that most of us are going to only visit this using commands. While everyone likes to talk about all the new stuff that we got with a new release, there's also plenty that's been removed. So I'm sorry to let you know that in 1.18, Mojang actually removed 34 biomes from the game. But rest assured, that's only because these sub-biomes only existed for the old generation to work. And nowadays with the new one, they're unnecessary. Have you ever heard the classic adage, dead men tell no tales? While that might be true, they don't forget them either. Even after you zombify a villager, it still manages to remember the gossip from its life. And don't ask me how getting your brains eaten still allows you to remember things like this, because I've got no earthly clue. This is the deadliest rabbit in Minecraft, or at least it was the deadliest rabbit in Minecraft. But ever since 1.8, the Killer Bunny variant no longer has a chance of spawning. And the reason for this, according to Jeb, is that the joke's already been made to death, so it was then removed. Or should I say the spawning was then removed, because if you use the summon command, it is still possible to get. I just wouldn't recommend that you stand too close when you do. Sometimes it's the little tweaks that answer the community's prayers, and this fits that list. See, at 1.18, when you enter the sound settings, it's now as simple as choosing an output device for the game's sounds. And while that can clearly help us on the recording side, it's also a quality of life feature for the rest of us to use. While Minecraft's textures have famously changed a lot, the game doesn't just look different, but it sounds different too. And nowhere is that more noticeable than if you take damage. Whereas now we're familiar with this damage sound effect, in the past, there was that classic sound effect where Steve would say, and as charming as that is, it's easy to understand why it was eventually removed. Some changes might be hard to notice until you take that closer look. Like this change to the way that chunks render. Now, they work in something of a cylinder pattern instead of the square one from before. And hopefully, even if it is hard to notice, it should help make the game run that little bit smoother. One of the big changes for Minecraft going forward is parity between how Java and Bedrock generate. So as the two versions get closer and closer, our enchantment tables are doing the same. And now, enchantment tables in the Java version give off a light level of 7, just enough to light up the 15 bookshelves nearby. Since beta 1.8 of Minecraft, if you were to dig down into the void and stand on top of Bedrock, you'd notice that down around those lower Y levels, there would be a void fog that would cloud up your vision, until eventually you reached to the bottom and it was pitch black, which I've gotta say made branch mining a whole lot scarier to do. And that's probably why this feature was removed in snapshot 14W34C. But since then, Minecraft worlds have gotten twice as deep, and honestly, with the deep dark, I feel like having void fog in the game again would make some sense. I mean, it doesn't fit with the old Minecraft textures, but with Deep Slate, I think it does the job. Nobody likes going slow, and even less like to be slowed down. So for that reason, it would always be a pain if you would brush up against a wall and then you'd stop sprinting. But from now on, don't sweat it, as now small angles like this will let you sprint just the same and finish up the parkour just as planned. You can't craft this item anymore, but before Minecraft 1.9, there was a way to craft an enchanted golden apple. Though to do this, you would have to pay a hefty price, putting 8 golden blocks inside of the crafting table around an apple, which is a hefty fee, but considering that nowadays the only way to find these is through rare loot chests, I think I'd much rather set up a gold farm and do this the old-fashioned way. At least then it's a matter of skill, not luck. Skeleton horses are a weird feature in Minecraft. Sure, they look awesome, but they're so slow and hard to get that they often work better as a trophy than a utility. That is, until Mojang started working on the aquatic side. No joke, what these lack on land, they actually make up for by being able to ride a skeleton horse underwater, which is just great. This was the first armor ever added to Minecraft. When Mojang was testing out adding armor to the game, the first one that they added in was actually called plate armor. And while it looks pretty similar to iron armor, you wouldn't want to get them mixed up, since the plate armor unfortunately gave no protection when you wore it. And I've got to say, if you're testing out armor, I feel like maybe having the armor actually protect you would be one of the things that you'd want to try first, but maybe that's just me. The building community is always looking for new ways to decorate, and since 1.16, campfires have gotten a lot more functionality there. Now, it's possible to place food food on an unlit campfire, allowing for some kind of shelf design to use in your base. It seems pretty situational, but I guess it's nice to have. Baby zombies are annoying, but they used to be so much worse. Back in 2012, they would just chase you around forever, since no matter if it was day or night, they wouldn't burn in the sunlight. And in fact, that wouldn't be added in until 1.13, which was a lot of updates of having to deal with these ankle biters. And now thankfully they take after their parents and say their goodbyes when it's daytime. In the early versions of Minecraft, animal breeding was buggy to say the least. So much so that if you wanted to breed your cows or your sheep, you could do that while you were 8 blocks away, and with a fence wall in between them, which is definitely a glitch, but it kind of proves that love knows no bounds, so I think that's kind of sweet. I think we all can agree that more accessibility options are always a good thing, which is why it's a real treat to see that the flashing lights from a lightning storm can now be toggled off like so. And if it lets me build a machine like this without the headache that comes with, that's definitely a plus. When pistons were first added in, they had a lot more errors about them. And one of the reasons this would happen is that it would only take one redstone tick to activate them, meaning with a fast enough clock, you could glitch them out like so. But later on, Mojang would double the amount of time that it would take them to extend, but they could still retract instantly. Unless you've got a drowned farm, it's tough to get a bunch of copper to your name, so any change to the ores would be a huge help. And they did just that in 1.18, as we can now get anywhere from 2 to 5 raw copper from an ore, instead of the 2 to 3 from the past. In the past, if you emptied a water bucket inside of a cauldron, there was no way to remove it, and the only way to get the water out of the cauldron was to break the cauldron and replace it, since using water bottles or an empty bucket couldn't do anything on it, which makes it seem like cauldrons have been useless for a whole long time. And maybe it's true that they're more useful for lava these days than they've ever been for water. Using lapis lazuli to enchant seems expensive, but it used to be so much worse, since back in the day it would require 50 levels for a max level enchant. And folks, that's not just 50 levels to qualify, that's 50 levels for one enchantment. And even though that got bumped down to 30 levels in 1.3.1, it was eventually entirely reworked in 1.8 to where you just need 3 levels after you hit the 30 level enchant barrier. For so long in Minecraft history, water and rails have not mixed, which is why it's hard to believe that this rule finally changed in 1.17. Going forward, we're able to place our rails and carts right next to flowing water just fine. I can already see this opening up a bunch of new possibilities. I imagine it's hard to code features that not only make sense for survival, but also the all-powerful creative mode, which is probably why milking was never implemented properly until recently. In fairness, when you're able to grab infinite milk buckets out of your inventory, why would you even bother with the cow? But if you really want to, then this change has got you covered. Ever since Minecraft 1.7, you haven't been able to get a rose in vanilla Minecraft. But the reason isn't all that serious, it's really just because the rose was eventually replaced with the name Poppy instead. And while texture packs like Vanilla Tweaks let you change this back to the original name, I think it's still a bummer for our iron golems. I mean, they don't even give out villagers flowers anymore. What's the difference between this desert well and this one? Well, in the past, the desert wells that you would find inside of desert villages had a bottom made out of cobblestone instead of sandstone. But in 1.11 that was changed so that it was more thematically consistent. Back in the day, golden apples used to be ridiculously cheap. And to get one of the basic ones, you only needed to use 8 golden nuggets instead of the 8 ingots that we use today. Though I guess nowadays they give us the absorption hearts, so maybe it is worth paying a little extra. And honestly, I'll save my golden nuggets for crafting golden carrots anyway. Those seem to be more useful. Some mistakes are so obscure that it's hard to notice even when they're pointed out to you. But sure enough, the armorer and weaponsmith variants of the zombie villagers had a mistake on their textures. And this was likely due to reusing the villager textures and missing a few pixels here and there. But nowadays, that's no more. When it was first added in, the wither was actually much easier to fight, since if you were to catch the wither inside of a minecart as it was charging up, you could interfere with its startup and it would only have as much health as it had before it went into the minecart. So if you did this correctly, you could end up fighting a wither that only had 1/3 of its health. But that bug would get fixed in 1.5, which is unfortunate, but maybe don't tell Mojang about this even easier way to kill the wither. We'll just keep that between us. Here's the fastest way to build a nether portal in Minecraft. See, if you were to play in alpha version 1.2.2a, it was possible for a player to spawn the nether portal by simply pressing the F4 key, which I don't care how good of a speedrunner you are, it's hard to beat that kind of speed. But unfortunately, that feature was short-lived, and it got removed in literally the next update. But that doesn't just mean that the F4 key is good for nothing, since nowadays if you press Alt F4, it'll actually take you to an entirely different dimension, your Windows home screen. Sorry. Okay, let's play a game of Spot the Difference. Looking at these two comparators, one in 1.17 and the other in 1.18, which is the recent version. Well, zoomed out like this, it's hard to tell, but with a closer look, now we can see that the powered comparator in 1.18 got some red pixels added to the texture. We're all familiar with this nether portal design. It's iconic for sure, but back in the day, it was so iconic, it was the only one you could make. But luckily, as of 1.7.2, we've now had the option to give them a different width and height than the standard 4x5 that we were used to. And if you're in Bedrock Edition, you can get a whole lot more creative for the designs you make. Just make sure you build all of them without corners, otherwise you're wasting obsidian. This is Minecraft Steve. Nothing new, right? And this is 100 Minecraft Steves. Maybe that's a little weirder. But back in the first version of Minecraft Classic, it was possible that if you pressed the G key on your keyboard, you could create an infinite number of Steves running around your world. And running around your world is a bit of an understatement for what they're doing. They would just flail around, oddly moving their limbs place to place. And nowadays, the G key has no functionality, and you can't summon Steves at all. So this is definitely an extinct feature. I feel like Minecraft's sound design often goes underappreciated. Really, if a sound effect works, then it shouldn't be noticeable, but rather just fitting background noise. So while you might not have noticed that vines now play a sound when you climb them, well, let's get a listen the next time that you're in a jungle. At least once just to hear it. Did you know that the squids used to be stronger? Well, sure enough, if you would get one beached on land, in the past, they wouldn't suffocate. And in fact, they weren't given the ability to do so until the 1.4.4 release, proving that even in the past, Mojang barely cared about this pointless mob. In the past, we've sung the praises of using a boat to negate any fall damage that you might take in the nether. But there's a reason we didn't tell you to do this back in 2012. For one, the channel didn't exist, but also, back then if you were in a boat, you would still take all of the fall damage that you take from a fall. And it wasn't until 1.7.2 that this finally got fixed, and our boat MLGs started to work out a bit better. In the past, if a creeper was about to explode, then any mobs within a certain range would turn and run away from the creeper. Which seems like it makes sense, right? Self-preservation and all that. But the real reason this feature was eventually removed was because it causes an immense amount of lag. Sure, it seems simple to have a mob run away when a creeper's about to explode, but to do that, Mojang had it where the mobs were constantly checking to see if there's an exploding creeper nearby. And when every mob that's loaded in the game is trying to do that all at once every single tick, it's no surprise that you got a lot of lag. And as cool as this feature would have been, it's never seen the light of day since. Even after a big overhaul like the 1.14 texture update, there's still plenty of tweaks to be made to Minecraft's design. So with each update, you're sure to see a couple of sprites get a subtle change. And here that lands to item frames, as now these will have a birch-colored frame to match their in-world model. Did you know that enchanted golden apples used to be a bad thing? Yeah, oddly enough, high levels of regeneration could actually lower or remove your invincibility frames entirely, which caused this bug to make you more susceptible to damage while you had an enchanted golden apple. And understandably so, this got fixed in 1.6.1, because that completely breaks this really powerful item. Now, although it was hard to summon the giant back in the day, there was a time where this mob actually had an AI. So when you got it into your world, it would both target and attack the player. And since it had 100 HP to its name and did 75 HP on attack, it was a lot scarier than the glorified statue that we've got today. Back in the day, Minecraft mobs used to jump, which doesn't sound that weird, but what's weird is how often they would do it. See, back in the beta versions of Minecraft, the AI for mobs wasn't the greatest, so whenever you would encounter any mob, they would just jump up and down repeatedly. Which is cute that they were excited, but you can definitely see why Mojang would patch this out before the game's full version. And nowadays, they're only gonna jump when they need to, like to get up a block or something. It seems like as long as villagers have been in the game, we've been trying to exploit their spawning techniques. And in the past, that was very different to do. All we needed was a door, a room, and a roof. And you can see that design in a villager breeder like this. And then, as soon as we got the village and pillage update in 1.14 to quote, fix the villager breeding, then it would instead require food and appropriate beds like so. Though both are very exploitable, so maybe it wasn't all that fixed. These were how many spawn eggs we had in 2012, and this is how many spawn eggs we have in 1.19. It's a crazy comparison to look at, considering the last 10 years, we've gained over 50 mobs. And in fact, 71 isn't even all the mobs in the game. There's actually 79 of them that are accessible in the current version, making that discrepancy even bigger. Now, I'll admit, sometimes Mojang makes a change that I can't wrap my head around. And this time, that would have to be the redesigns to the campfire sprites, since now these are made to have a shorter flame than before, and that's it. And personally, I'd still prefer if they took after vanilla tweaks and made them animated instead. Back during the development phases of Minecraft, Notch originally added these giant zombies to the game, and the idea is that these would function as some kind of boss when you saw them in the game, but that whole idea fell through, though they weren't properly removed either, since according to Notch, they were just too cool to remove. And honestly, I disagree, considering that the only time I've ever seen these in the game, they've never had AI, so they're basically just a big statue. Not to mention the fact that they only have 100 hearts of health, which did seem big at the time, but that's the exact same amount of health as the Iron Golem, which when you do a size comparison is not nearly as impressive. Roller coasters are a great thing, but in 2012, they were a nightmare, since the rails, no matter which way you placed them, would always be positioned on a north by south axis. And the only way to fix that was to add in more rails like so, which is a nightmare to say the least. And surprisingly, this took up until 1.15, where now it finally places facing the player, which is a bit late, but still better than the alternative. repetitive. You're probably familiar with this command to turn off fire ticks so that fires don't generate anymore. And while that does work, back in the day it was a little wonky, since do fire tick would allow for lightning to still generate fires, meaning if you had enough time in a world, almost every single block would have a netherrack effect, not letting fire spread, but also not getting rid of it. Before we got the update Aquatic in 1.13, the ocean biome looked extremely dark, and in fact, even if you placed glowstone down there, that would only light up about 5 blocks around it. But nowadays, we've got things like sea lanterns and coral reefs to finally light up the abyss, which is nice, but that update also added in the drowned mobs, so you get what you get, I guess. If you play Minecraft on PC, you're probably not familiar with this, but for those of you who played Minecraft on console, this is instantly recognizable as the Minecraft tutorial world. And it's probably a bit nostalgic, because this hasn't been in the game since. But in this iconic world, you'd find the classic Minecraft logo built across the sky, with a whole bunch of tutorials underneath to teach you the details of Minecraft. But as charming as this was, it was removed from the game eventually, and now the only way to get it is by downloading a map. And I guess if anyone should be happy this got removed, it would be me, but I'm a little sad to see this piece of Minecraft history go to the wayside. Using the right tool to break a block is usually straightforward, but what's weirder is when certain blocks don't require a tool at all. And for a time, the conduit was in that category, though from this point, they can only be broken with a pickaxe, which I think makes sense anyhow. From version 1.8 to 1.13 of Minecraft, there existed a special option in the world building settings. Or should I say options, because when you clicked on this custom world builder menu, it allowed you to customize a whole bunch about your Minecraft world, like the ability to change the sea level, the dungeon count, whether you had villages or not, and a whole bunch more. It makes a lot of sense for a sandbox game. Honestly, I'm surprised that it's been cut out entirely. But seeing the kind of horrors that you can generate with this world type, maybe that's for the best. When a zombie or skeleton used to stand on a slab, it wouldn't burn into the daylight, which is terrifying to say the least, so thankfully this got fixed as well in 1.8. Otherwise, I'd have to make sure that I place a lot less slabs in my base, and I'm not looking for that kind of reality check. When you stood at close range, a skeleton could not shoot you, since in the older versions, a skeleton would try to rush forward and then shoot the player, which meant that if you cornered it in a 2x2x1 area, it would try to shoot you, but all of its shots would just hit the wall behind you, meaning that none of the arrows were capable of hitting the player. And unfortunately for us, the skeletons got a lot smarter in 1.9, and this doesn't work anymore. This is the rarest structure in Minecraft, and not just because it doesn't exist anymore, but even when they existed in the game, these giant brick pyramids were rarer than woodland mansions are today, though you would have only found them during the in-dev phase of Minecraft, which alone is tough enough to boot up that version. But lucky for us, they did have a specific location that they spawned in, so as soon as you found one, you were still able to share it with your friends. As advertised, the 1.18 update brings a big change to how our worlds generate, but one of the sneakier changes is the way that bedrock layers now work. See, in the past, these layers remain consistent in all worlds, regardless of your seed, but now it's set to randomize just like any other block would generate. In the past, we could only place chests like this, and that was it, since there was no way to place a third chest next to a double chest. Or rather, you could, but you'd have to use an alternating pattern of trapped chests and regular chests, and that was just a lot of hassle, and a lot of cost too. So thankfully, we got this restriction removed in 1.13, letting us place as many chests as we want right next to each other, which is a nice fix, but I'm still hoping for the day that we get to place different wood types of chests right next to each other. That'll be especially cool. Not only were the oceans boring back in the past, but they also used to be way too big. Since back in the day, you could travel for thousands of blocks and not come across any side of mainland, which made it a big problem if you happened to spawn on a survival island like so, which is why this got changed in 1.7.2 so that the ocean sizes were limited. Before the 1.8 update, we were able to use soul sand and other blocks that were slightly smaller than a full block hitbox to make these one-way doorways. Since if you walk through the archway like so, you could exit, but you couldn't come back because you would just be hitting your head on that top block. I mean, I guess you could always break the block, but in theory it was a one-way doorway. As it is, it's pretty tough to get a beacon to work in the nether, since you've got to clear out all of the netherrack above it. But in the past, it was even worse, since back then, the beacon beam wouldn't even go through the bedrock. So to even get it to work, you'd have to remove the unbreakable block from up top. And thankfully that was corrected in 1.8.2, so you don't have to rely on a glitch to make this happen. Minecraft has plenty of minor frustrations, and sometimes it's hard to notice them until they happen to you. Like in the past when you would type into bed, only for it to close the chat window once you wake up. And thankfully that's been rectified for us going forward. This secret feature was added to Minecraft only to be removed shortly after. But for a brief period during release 1.7, you could find a feature in your settings menu called Super Secret Settings. And while that's ominous, when you would click on it, it actually showed off different shader options for Minecraft. And the different settings were weird to say the least. You could go from everything from pixelated to black and white and even upside down. And honestly, I'm surprised it was possible for Minecraft to get more pixelated anyway. But what seemed like an early show off for adding in shader effects to vanilla Minecraft was quickly removed. And the worst part, we never got to find out the secret. Ever since Minecraft's Wild update, this popular feature no longer exists. But before 1.19, it was possible to upgrade your brightness from bright to super bright, considering that you could go into the game's files and just manually change the gamma settings. But I guess it does make sense that the same update that they added in, the deep dark, they would also remove this insane brightness option. It kinda removes the fun. And nowadays, the only way they're gonna pull this off is by using one of the many mods out there that exist for a third-party alternative. It's funny to think that back in 2012, redstone looked entirely different, and the kind of redstone doors that we could build looked a lot more like this than the kind of monstrosities that we can build today. And I'm sure you could ask Mumbo Jumbo, as soon as that 1.5 update came out, that was definitely a blessing for the community. In the past, it was possible for the Wither to destroy its own nether star due to its last-minute detonations of Wither skulls. No joke, there were times where if you killed the Wither, it might fire off one last-minute projectile, and then that'll break the star before you actually get it, making that whole fight for naught. And thankfully, this got fixed in 1.5, where it was patched so that now the skulls that spawn on death were then forced removed. Nowadays, we're all familiar with the concept of an MLG water bucket save, but back in the day, it wasn't as popular, and for good reason. See, in the past, you'd need a puddle that was 2 blocks deep to stop any kind of fall damage, and it wasn't until after 1.4.4 that we could finally do this with 1 bucket. For years, the building community has wanted some way to stop plants from growing past a certain point, and fortunately, we can now pull it off in the base game by using shears like so. So if you want your glowberries, kelp, and nether vines to stay that way, this will do the trick. But the regular vines still don't do it, unfortunately. Before the path block was ever added to Minecraft, our villages looked entirely different, and the reason was that these originally spawned with gravel roads instead. But ever since the grass path block was added in, you won't see any gravel show up in this way anymore, which is weird when you see the grass path blocks out inside of the desert as well. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like gravel would have made more sense there. If you kill a Minecraft zombie, what does it drop? Well, in the past, it used to be feathers. Since before rotten flesh even existed as an item, Notch didn't know what zombies were supposed to drop. So as a placeholder, when zombies are killed, they drop around 2 feathers on death, which is by far the weirdest way I can think of for making a farm for these. But since chickens don't spawn in dungeons, I guess this was maybe easier to get. Although all of that changed in beta 1.8 when zombies would finally get the item that they were supposed to have, rotten flesh. Here's how you get infinite obsidian, at least infinite obsidian back in 2012. Since the system to make this was just using a standard cobblestone generator and then placing a piece of redstone dust where the cobblestone would form. And there you go, infinite obsidian. Though understandably this got patched out in 1.8. But infinite obsidian is still possible, you're just gonna need a wither and a whole bunch of nether portals. Now this is a lava bucket and this is a lava source block. So how do we get both in our inventory? Well, in the past, the give command was a lot stronger than it is today. So if you typed in /give player 10 or 11, it would give you either flowing or stationary lava blocks. And as you could probably guess, this got removed in 1.8, which is too bad, but honestly, I don't know the point of having one of these versus just a regular lava bucket. Are Minecraft bundles extinct? We honestly don't know. I mean, sure, they were added into the game in 1.17, but they still don't have a proper implementation. I mean, you can't even craft them. And now that we've gone 2 Minecraft updates since the future, that's still the case. And while this item does still seem useful, with the ability to let you stack up 64 items regardless of the item type, it was ultimately removed from the Caves and Cliffs Part 2. So is it extinct? Who knows? But is it forgotten? Well, not by the community, but maybe by Mojang. When dolphins were first added to Minecraft, they came along with a bug, which is that through special methods, you were actually able to equip armor onto dolphins. Granted, you wouldn't be able to see it since it didn't render on top of the mob, but if you tried to hit one of them, especially one with thorns, you'd notice that they'd actually have the armor and its effects. And then if you killed the dolphin, it'd even drop the armor as well. But this was eventually removed and it hasn't been in the game since, which is maybe just to keep us from doing a cruel joke of giving a dolphin Frostwalker and watching whatever kind of horror unloads. Here's how you get water in the nether. See, back in Java version 1.2 or older, it was possible that if you put ice in the nether, it would melt and then turn into a water source block, which was fixed in 1.3, but we would eventually get water in the nether once again through this snapshot with glow lichen. Though that got fixed too, so it's definitely something Mojang's trying to keep an eye out for. Back in the day, the end dimension used to look like a mess. And I'm not talking about the old endstone texture, but rather the obsidian pillars that would spawn there were scattered and unorganized back in the day. And really, it's hard to appreciate this one until you look at a side-by-side, because now with the ring of pillars, it looks so much better. And I'm sure that Sandiction's build wouldn't have looked nearly as good if this didn't get fixed. These Minecraft villagers do not exist anymore. Or at least they don't in this way. Because prior to 1.14, the villagers used to dress a lot differently. And instead of having to interact with them to find out what their job was, they actually traded differently based on the color of coat that they wore. Whether that was pink, green, or the iconic white coat villager that you'd see in something like old Dan TDM videos. But perhaps the biggest loss from this era was the fact that they didn't need restock stations, which when you're waiting for your librarian to finally restock on mending books, that'd be a welcome change. Now, back in 2012, we did have ice and we did have boats, but we wouldn't have ice highways until 1.9. And the reason was because back in 2012, the boat would move as slow on ice as it did on land. So all you'd get from building yourself an ice highway was a waste of time to use an even greater waste of time on. Back in 2012, if you ended up going past 30 million blocks in either the X or Z direction, you'd start to run into these phantom chunks, where they'd still look like regular chunks, except once you went through them, you'd fall right into the void when you step on it. But now in 1.19, we can get to the world border, but we can't go past 29,999,999. Before the update Aquatic in 1.13, any items that you threw into the water would all float down to the bottom of the ocean floor. But nowadays, they thankfully will all float up to the surface and bob in place. Nowadays, command blocks are indestructible, but that wasn't always the case. And in fact, when they first came out, you could place them and even mine them in survival. Though even though you were able to place and move around this block, you couldn't use it unless you were in creative mode. And after 1.6.1, you couldn't even do that. So really, it wasn't that useful of a block if you're in survival. Now, it is true that you can't hit an Enderman with any projectiles, but that wasn't the case in 2012. Since back then, an Enderman still wouldn't be hit by an arrow, but if you used a flaming arrow, then that Enderman would take damage and catch fire as it would. Though this got fixed in 1.5, which is definitely a bummer for my flame bow. Villager trades used to be a ripoff, and that's not me being cheeky, but it's quite literally true. Since in the past, there were villager trades that would ask for more than 64 emeralds per trade, which makes it completely unobtainable to the player since you can't offer more than 64 in a stack at a time. And in 1.8, that got limited down to the stack limit. When we first started using them, ender pearls did not have a cooldown to them, so you could throw them continuously, which usually resulted in taking a lot of damage. But if you had feather falling boots, it was a fun way to get yourself out of trouble and right back to the action, completely transforming a version of PvP. Though in 1.9 it was changed so that they had a cooldown and that you could use them in creative mode, which I guess is a trade-off. If you play on a PvP legacy server, you're definitely familiar with this one. Since back in 2012, we could PvP by spam clicking, but with 1.9, we got a huge overhaul to that system. And now we've got cooldowns, shields, the whole works. Bone meal's a great thing, but it used to be so much better. Since in the past, you could immediately push a crop to its final stage, instead of getting a random buff like we do today, which made it a lot more hilarious to spam trees on your friend's lawn, but I get why it was fixed. It definitely was overpowered. And with that, folks, YouTube thinks that you might like this video, so see if they're right and have a good one, alright?